Okay, we'll call the meeting for Friday, May 16th, 2025 for the SKIP Executive Board to order. And I'd like to welcome everyone. And Claire, if you would please call roll.
Certainly. City of Auburn, Nancy Backus.
Here.
City of Kent, Dana Ralph. I don't see her. All right, maybe she'll come later. City of Burien, we heard Liz Steed is out, but the alternate Anya Zupancic is here. Is that right? Yeah, great, thank you. City of Covington, Christina Soltis.
Here.
Welcome. City of Des Moines, Jean Oxiger. Oh, we didn't hear you. We didn't hear you, Jean, but I see you there. Yes, thank you. Perfect. City of Federal Way, Brian Davis.
Here.
Welcome. City of Maple Valley, Victoria Schroff.
Here.
Welcome. City of Normandy Park, Eric Zimmerman.
I'm here.
Welcome. City of Renton, Carmen Rivera. I don't see her, but I do see the alternate James Alberson.
I am here.
Welcome. City of SeaTac, James Lovell. I see him.
I'm
Thank
here.
you. City of Tukwila, Thomas McLeod.
I know if he's not on yet, he will be getting on. He thought the meeting was here in person. And so he is in one of our offices logging in. So
Okay. Okay. Thank you. King County, Sonari Marshall.
Here.
Great. And I do see City of Kent, Dana Ralph.
good
joined
afternoon.
as well. Thank you. All right. So we're only missing Thomas.
Okay, and he will be on soon, I know. All right, so thank you to all the board members, and I know we do have a SKIP Advisory Board member here today. Maria, would you like to introduce yourself and say a few words?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to thank you guys for having me be here. I think this is the right space to say it. I have enjoyed being on the advisory board, and I am learning a lot that I can share with the community, and I'm surprised how many people didn't know as much as I didn't know. So it's an opportunity for growth, and I share it willingly and broadly with all who will listen. So thank you for letting me be here.
Excellent. Well, we are thankful for your service on the SKIP Advisory Board and for your willingness to be here with us today. And Claire, I just had Mayor McLeod come in and say he is on his phone. So I don't know if you see a phone. I don't see one, but maybe there's more than one screen.
There is a phone in the attendees. However, I cannot promote a phone number to a panelist position.
Let's see. We can allow him to talk. It looks like that's an option.
Is that him, the
Yep.
4821?
Yes, that must be.
Okay. This is Mayor McLeod, so if I can attend by phone, I'll do that today.
Perfect.
Great.
Thank you and welcome. All right, Claire, would you like to, we always appreciate the staff working group. So if you would like to help identify all of the amazing staff working group members that are here today, I would appreciate that.
Absolutely. I see Marina Hansen here from the City of Kent. And we've got Matt Torpy from the City of Maple Valley. Thank you. And Anya Zupancic, she's serving on the board today, but she does serve as our staff work group member for the City of Burien. And Angie Matthias from the City of Renton. And Evan, I just saw Evan Maxim from the City of SeaTac. Welcome. And my screen is bouncing around, but I think I got everyone. I think that's it. Thank you. Oh, and Mayor, you are on mute. Still on mute.
Can you hear me?
There.
Can you hear me now?
Oh,
We can hear you. Can you hear me now?
we can hear you now.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. And we have Dennis Martinez here from Tukwila as well.
Yes, welcome.
Yes, that's what I've said 3 or 4 times now, but my mute button for some reason is not working well today. So I'm just going to leave myself off of mute. All right. So we will move to public comment. This is the time on the agenda for public comment. And if you are attending, if you would like to make a comment, please use the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen, and you will have 3 minutes to make your remarks. Please state your name and city of residence for the record. And Claire, is anyone online wishing to provide comment at this time?
There are no hands raised in the attendees, and we didn't receive any written.
No written. All right, we will move on then to the approval of the April 18th, 2025 minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Is there anything in the minutes that needs changing or correcting? All right, all those in favor of the approval of the April 18th, 2025 minutes, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say no. The minutes have been approved. Claire, are there any agenda modifications?
No, there are none.
All right. We'll move on to item 5, board business. And so we're going to talk about the reserve policy, and we have been talking about that in our previous 2 meetings in March and April. And the SKIP fund earned $540,000 in interest in 2024, which I think is amazing. Today, we'll decide whether to reserve the equivalent of 60% or 100% of SKIP's annual expenditures, with the remaining amount allocated to the Housing Capital Fund. And Claire, I am going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So 3 options were discussed at the March 21st and April 18th, 2025 SKIP Executive Board meetings regarding the use of interest earned in 2024 and ongoing. As of last meeting, the preferred choice of the board was to establish a reserve policy which sets aside the equivalent of either 60% or 100% of annual expenses into reserve to be used to mitigate the impacts of a recession or for larger unanticipated expenses, with the remaining interest being applied to the annual funding round of the SKIP Housing Capital Fund. We reviewed a memo at the April 18th meeting, which provided details on the presented options. And that memo was also included in this meeting's agenda packet sent to you on Friday, May 9th at 3:36 p.m. from me. And by way of brief background, from 2019 to 2023, contributions to SKIP in the operating and capital fund earned $153,529 in interest. And to spend interest earnings requires the approval of each SKIP member council with allocated earned interest based on their contributions. In 2024, this was done through the annual work plan and budget adoption process, and member councils gave their approval for the use of these funds to be applied to SKIP's operating fund balance. Interest accrued in 2024 on all SKIP funds totaled $540,377. The board has not adopted an ongoing policy for use of interest earnings, which is why we're discussing this. So if the board still desires to set aside an amount in reserve as unrestricted fund balance, you will need to take action on this item today before adopting the 2026 work plan and budget in order for that amount to be incorporated into the budget as a reserve line item at the bottom of that budget. So because of that, this agenda item precedes the adoption of the 2026 work plan and budget. And so to refresh your memory on this topic, let's briefly look at the options that we discussed previously. So this is taken directly from the memo in your agenda packet. Option 2 and 3 are the options the board was most interested in the last meeting, so I'll focus my comments there. Option 2 would maintain the equivalent of 60% of annual expenditures in reserve and apply the remaining to the Housing Capital Fund. The reserve in 2026 would total $301,000, and the additional Housing Capital Fund contribution would total $239,000 for the 2025 funding round for the Capital Fund. So we will be making $3.5 million available this funding round for the capital fund. So this would bring that total to just over $3.7 million. Option 3 would maintain the equivalent of 100% of annual expenditures in reserve and apply the remaining to the Housing Capital Fund. So the reserve total in 2026 would be just under $502,000. And the additional Housing Capital Fund contribution would be $38,000 in 2025. So this table shows the amounts that would go into reserve in the first and second year and how much would be allocated to the Housing Capital Fund this year and next by option. I did use a conservative estimate, as mentioned last meeting, of $200,000 for the earned interest in 2025. As you can see, the lower percent in reserve would mean less in the reserve and more in the Housing Capital Fund. A higher percentage means more would go into reserve and less in the Housing Capital Fund. Ongoing, all options would result in similar amounts being allocated to the Housing Capital Fund. And to reiterate, the amount decided upon to go into reserve will show up in the budget and will be considered unrestricted fund balance in reserve. The amounts that go into the reserve will also be included for approval in the work plan and budget adoption process coming to your city councils over the next few weeks. And thank you, Chair. I'd be happy to take any questions the board may have.
Thank you, Claire. Any questions? Brian.
Thanks, Mayor. So we talked a little bit about this last time. Claire, I'm wondering, as the executive, what is your recommendation?
Well, I would say it really is, it's up to the board in terms of your risk tolerance on these topics. I personally, as the executive, having some funds go towards the Housing Capital Fund, I think is always a positive. That said, from the city's perspective and wanting to keep SKIP in a solid financial position, no matter what the future economic situation is in the future. I also trust the board here to decide about, the interest and the risk tolerance of member cities' ability to support SKIP in economic downturn. So, I think both of the options the board discussed last time, the 60% or the 100%, either is going to be a good outcome for the fiscal health of SKIP. So I think you can't go wrong here.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Other questions? I know, Dana, we hadn't had a chance. You have not been able to weigh in at the last meeting or the last two meetings, perhaps. Did you have any thoughts on this? Don't mean to put you on on the hook, and if you would prefer not to answer, that's fine, but just wanted to make sure you had a chance.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. I will tell you that I am inclined to go with option 3. I like the idea of knowing that those reserves are there. I could support option 2, but definitely not option 1. I just think it's prudent for us to have that complete set of reserves set aside. And in the long run, I don't know that in that first year it's as significant of a hit to the housing fund as it would be to the organization to not have those reserves. So I'd rather err on the side of the reserves and know that we'll build that money back in. But this is a really good opportunity to set aside reserves because it's found money. I just think it makes more sense to be conservative on that front.
Yes, thank you. Other thoughts? Okay. So we have a motion if people are ready to vote on that today. I hope that you have been gathering some feedback from your mayor and council. James?
Yeah, sorry, Nancy. I've been on Teams so much, I forgot where the raise hand button was on Zoom. I'm kind of I think either option makes sense to me. Agree that I don't think the entire amount should go in. The thing I'm looking at right now as someone whose day job is literally applying for things like the SKIP Housing Capital Fund. I think there's a lot of uncertainty right now in where the capital money is going to be coming from. I know that the county has their housing finance program, but things like health through housing are starting to get fully utilized, which means there will be fewer of those kinds of properties or less capital being invested into the system that way. I think everyone is standing around waiting to see what happens with the National Housing Trust Fund or anything at the federal level around housing. I think folks may have seen there's been a request by our president to, was it discontinue, maybe Scenario knows, discontinue the continuum of care funding for permanent supportive housing and things like that. Now, I don't think any of our projects that we funded are in that category as far as like operations of our projects, but I think it signals that there's going to be less in capital from some sources. As the county looks at their big budget cut, that's going to have to come, or some way they're going to have to balance the budget deficit. I don't know how much other funders, whether it's the state or the county, are going to have to shift funding around out of capital budgets to cover current operational commitments. All of that is to say, with the uncertainty around capital funding that's out there, that's leaning me a little bit towards the middle option, just to try to add a little more to the capital pot. But because it's overall, we're not talking about millions and millions, right? We're talking about a couple 100,000 at most. It's enough to get maybe one project over the hump on some funding. It's not enough to completely fund an additional building or anything really. So I'm not super strong. I mean, I have a slight preference towards 2 just because I like to see more capital in the system overall, but it's not a really strong preference. So I would be satisfied with the fully, because I think there's a logic too that cities are going to have to start shifting funding around, and even our contributions to the your basic membership dues, right, could be at risk. So I also don't think there's a wrong question here. I'm still evaluating a lot. It's so speculative, for all of us on capital and operations and housing right now.
Right. Yeah, it absolutely is a very uncertain time for what's going to happen with capital projects. But as you said, if we don't know what our city budgets are going to be in the upcoming times, to where even the annual dues for member cities may be called into question. And so having a reserve could certainly help us get through a challenging time for the existence of our organization, to live on, to fight another battle another day. So
I think that just talked me into the fully funded reserve.
Okay, well, if anyone would like to make a motion for one of the options.
I'll go ahead. I don't have any language in front of me, so I'm just going to do this off the top of my head. I move that the board approve option number 3 for the use of interest earnings and the establishment of a 100% reserve fund. Does that
Second.
cover it?
I think you covered that very well, especially without having something in front of you. All right, is there any question or comment? All right, all those in favor of approving option number 3, the 100% expenses in reserves, please say aye.
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 All
Aye.
opposed, please say no. Motion passes. We will be utilizing the 100% expenses in reserve, option 3. Thank you all very much. All right, on to the next item, the 2026 work plan and budget. And as you know, the interlocal requires the executive board recommend an annual work plan and budget. So in January, we completed a survey to support the development of the annual work plan. Remember that. And we provided further input at the March workshop and at the April meeting. And so today we will finish our discussion and hopefully adopt the 2026 work plan and budget. Claire, I'll turn it over to you for more discussion.
Thank you, Chair. So today we are at the end of our development process of the annual work plan and budget, which is a requirement of our interlocal agreement. You have reviewed 2 draft versions prior to this meeting and provided feedback, which has been incorporated. And you should have a clean and final draft in your agenda packet, which I am seeking your approval on today. The version included in your agenda packet is the same as we reviewed last meeting, with the exception of 3 minor changes. So just to review the changes briefly, so the resolution number at the very top has been updated to 2025-01 rather than 2025-02. And action items 14 and 15 have swapped places. Very minor changes, but did want you to just be aware. And then in terms of goal 3's indicator, hosting a successful legislative forum was added to the indicator there. And then of course, based on the action that you just took in the previous agenda item, I will go ahead and add the $501,975 to the reserve line item. And you can consider that included when you make the motion for the adoption of this work plan and budget as well. So the version you have just has these X's, but because we took action, we will assume it will be incorporated there. So once the board adopts the recommended work plan and budget, I will be seeking concurrence from SKHHP's member cities by July 7th, and we are scheduled already on the council calendars. So many thanks to our staff work group members for making that happen. And from there, the adopted version will be sent to King County to make it through their lengthy approval process by the end of the year, which is also a requirement of our interlocal agreement. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Claire. Are there any questions? All right, if there are no questions, I will enter. Now this one is just for, no, we have a motion today. If anyone is interested in making the motion adopting the 2026 SKHHP work plan and budget, incorporating any action taken adopting the reserve policy that we just completed.
So
Is
moved.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second on resolution 2025-01. Is there any discussion? Right, all those in favor of approval of resolution 2025-01, the work plan and budget for 2026, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say no. Resolution 2025-01 passes, and we have a work plan and a budget. And Claire, I think the work begins for you now because you need to take this to the member councils, correct?
That's correct. And we've actually already presented it to 2 of the councils because of some scheduling constraints. And so, yes, we call this going on tour, and we will see you all in the coming weeks.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, let's move on then to the 2025 Housing Capital Fund guidelines and priorities. And as you know, each year we undertake a review of the guidelines and priorities. So today we are going to review the draft 2025 guidelines. As Claire has a presentation, and the guidelines were developed incorporating input received at the April Executive Board meeting, with adoption planned for our June 13th Executive Board meeting. Claire, please let us know what we need.
Yes, so thank you, Chair. So this will be our 4th annual funding round of the Housing Capital Fund. So last meeting, I solicited your feedback on any changes that you'd like to make to the guidelines or funding priorities. I incorporated that feedback received and also made some clarifying changes in language and incorporated language to reflect our current practice, such as requiring applicants to use a standard set of underwriting standards developed between SKIP and other public funders. The draft guidelines were sent to you Wednesday, May 14th at 2:34 p.m. by me, and you should have a clean copy and a track changes version. And I do believe that's also included in your calendar invitation. So the vast majority of language changes are minor administrative cleanups, but I would like to focus our time together on a few key changes. And before we dive into the changes, I wanted to review the background of the Housing Capital Fund briefly for the benefit of our newer members. So SKIP members pool resources from Substitute House Bill 1406, House Bill 1590, and the General Fund for Affordable Housing Construction and Preservation or Rehabilitation in South King County. The interlocal agreements for pooling sales tax receipts to administer funds under RCW 8214-530 and 540 require that for each funding round, the Executive Board identify funding guidelines that includes funding priorities, the amount available, eligible activities, and geographic areas, in addition to a lot more. So every year we adopt the funding guidelines with minor tweaks usually. So let's look at the more substantive changes I mentioned earlier. So first is in response to the board discussion at our last meeting. The board discussed having a priority that reflects the desire to prioritize locations that are less vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and that also incorporate elements of climate adaptability. So the board discussed the title climate equity, but to allow for the broader meaning of what the board discussed to encompass the location and the building's incorporation of energy efficiency, I'm proposing the term climate adaptive, which you can see here on the screen. And this is the language I developed, and I'll read it for you. Climate adaptive, projects located in neighborhoods which are less vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, including impacts related to extreme heat and flooding, or projects that incorporate heat pumps, energy efficiency, renewable energy, tree coverage, open space access, and/or climate adaptability features are a high priority. So would love any feedback on this language from the board at this time. And I'll keep kind of soliciting your feedback for each of the items we go through. So that would be helpful.
Excellent. Thank you, Claire. Any thoughts, any comments? Victoria?
I just want to say thank you for incorporating that language. I think you captured it really well, and I like the creativity of the new way to describe it. And I'm really pleased with it. So thank you.
Great. Any other comments? Okay.
All right. Oh,
Oh, James and then Eric.
Yeah, I'm wondering, so this has got an or in it, and I'm wondering if there's a prior, is that going to make it hard on scoring or applying points to this, right? Because you could have two competing projects, one that is in a less vulnerable neighborhood and then one that incorporates this other stuff. Is there a prioritization within this of which is a higher priority, like the first clause or the second?
up to the board. I would say keeping it flexible is probably the best so that you're giving the advisory board that flexibility to make that call, and knowing that if either of these things are in a project, that's a good thing.
Okay.
But usually projects, when it comes down to it, there's so many factors that we're looking at that it's not gonna make it's not gonna it's not gonna be the deal breaker, right? To compare against, well, this one has energy efficiency, but this one's located in. So there's just so many other factors that play into it. So
So I have a second question is then for the first clause, is there I'm thinking of the applicants, is there like a source they would go to look at that? You know, like per what guideline, who determines, you know, what is a less vulnerable location? Or are we intentionally leaving it flexible so that applicants can make the case for their project?
yeah, I would say leaving it flexible is always going to be good. And if folks are interested, you know, there are those heat maps, you know, urban heat maps that are being widely distributed right now. There's a big study going on, I know, with City of Auburn and other parties about that. And so happy to share those in those pre-application meetings with folks. And I'm sure there's other, you know, in terms of flooding, I know those maps exist as well, you know.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All the questions I had. Thank you.
Eric.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to be thoughtful and intentional how I share my remarks. Actually, much of my professional life has been in the environment and climate space, and very large government initiatives and programs and projects around the world, and the intersection between climate and poverty. So this is an issue I understand very well. I actually don't support the inclusion here. Personally, I think this is a case where the technical quality, the strategic quality of what we're focusing on for housing could be diluted if we were to incorporate strategies like this, or cross-cutting themes or additional criteria like this, because on the one hand, while it is urgent and important that we have public policy responses to climate change and try to have programs that have positive impacts against that, I don't see the fit here personally. And I think the ability for us to stay very focused on what we know is important and relevant and urgent for housing is better if we keep a smaller number of criteria and requirements for how we consider and prioritize new projects. And my recommendation would be not including it, but I also know that Normandy Park is a smaller funder. We're one of just a very small voice among many others. So that's just my perspective. I think it could potentially weaken and dilute more important focus areas for us.
Thank you, Eric. And just want to make sure that all of you know that we value everyone's opinion. it's not dependent on the number of dollars that are contributed. This is equally important amongst all of our South King County cities, that our voices are equal, and that we value every one of them the same. So please don't think that Normandy Park's contribution financially to this organization deems it any less valuable.
And just to respond to, we talked a little bit about this last month in the meeting, that the priorities are really a reflection of the philosophical priorities that we have, that we've listed. We're not saying you have to have, you know, each and every one of these things, but in the reviewing process, we do want to see that projects incorporate a handful of the priorities, and that's usually what we end up seeing. So with the inclusion of this, it would mean, you know, if a project does incorporate, you know, climate adaptability features, like solar panels, for instance, or heat pumps, you know, that would just be called out in the process, and saying we like these things, and, you know, we would encourage them when appropriate.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. I appreciate that, and thank you as well, Mayor Bacchus, for your kind remarks. Claire, actually, I think as my final comment on this, I think that you actually zeroed in on what I would consider concerning. The technologies that you're discussing, solar or heat pumps, relative to, you know, the overall budget size of a project, those would be drivers of increased cost. And this is where we could have two noble purposes: housing affordability and climate impact. And potentially those could be at cross purposes if we try too hard to combine them, where our ability to get affordable housing online could be undercut if we do too much to encourage a separate focus of also having climate impact through costly technologies. I think there could be a point in the future where climate-friendly technologies are less costly, and I would think at that point it could be a real advantage to try to include that as a strategic focus area. But just at the moment, just personally, I don't see the connection, and in fact, I could see it potentially causing us to be less effective. But I also get your point that it's not mandatory that be included. I just see it so often in the professional world where creep and overly broad strategic purposes or overly broad planning or writing of this kind attempts to be especially virtuous by including everything that could be thought of in you know, priority areas, and that I think more often than not ends up being a liability instead of an advantage. And just it concerned me to see it here because I see it so often in other contexts.
Thank you, Eric. Sonari.
I'm wondering, actually, I want to hear Victoria go first, and then, because I think this was hers originally, and then because what I was going to say was maybe citing something she said last time. So I'll cede and then come back later, hopefully.
Okay. Victoria.
Thank you very much. Ordinarily, I wouldn't want to go a second time until everybody's gone at first, but thank you. Yeah, what I would like to see is just the consideration that we're talking about not just technical inclusions of items in the building, as it's highlighted in this new priority. Location is a big part of it. So that was one of my major concerns, was location. So climate equity, where it involves, you know, people, as it says in the first part of the statement, projects located in neighborhoods which are less vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And there are a number of things that play into that. I mentioned last time flight patterns, things like that. So I really do appreciate the thoughtful comments that are going into this conversation. It's always a learning process for me as well. But that is one of the major things I had in mind, because we don't want to, you know, the way I see it is, in our desire to create housing that we need so desperately right now. I don't want us to sort of perpetuate that cycle of lower income housing being built in areas that are more vulnerable to climate change. So for that reason, and because this is a priority, it's not a requirement, I feel like you would view all of these as sort of a basket of things that we're looking at, and weighing each project as which one includes the most elements, most of those elements. So that's my main concern with this, and why to me it's important to keep it in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sonari?
Yeah. See, I knew she was going to say what I was going to say. Yeah, that I took, because I recall, Eric, and I forget if you were at the last meeting, that I said something similar about a little bit of a concern about the technology aspect, because ESDS is already there for affordable housing. But I found the interest in location particularly compelling, both for the items that are suggested here and also some of the things Victoria said last time and this time around, placement of housing right next to highways, or, not that we have a bunch of power plants in this area, but that would be a concern in other parts of the US, but whatever the kind of more toxic environmental bads might be. And I don't see that reflected quite in this language right now, but that was some of what sold me on this last time, is that while that may also add cost to a project because crappy land is cheaper, I think the benefit to the resident is significant, in that we don't want to perpetuate a cycle of placing affordable housing in environmentally risky areas. And then I have some sympathy for Eric's point about the technology, because I've been fighting that same battle back and forth as we work through our own strategic climate action plan of like, what is the right thing? If we put it as a priority, but we don't fund the priority separately, do we end up with just more expensive housing? And I've been personally trying to push for like, hey, can we get a resource for green tools for affordable housing? But that's for another day.
Okay, thank you. James?
Thank you. I'm in agreement with actually, I think everyone, and I think Eric in particular. I think there's so many of these environmental regulations that don't have a huge impact on preserving the environment, but have a huge impact on costs. For households that are just not going to use the service, like certain jurisdictions around the country have electric car hookups for families that, no one in the building in these multifamily buildings has an electric car or will be able to afford one. And not that we, want to steer folks away from that, but they add significant cost to projects. So when it's a requirement, I'm pretty much on the, opposite side of what I think environmentalists like to hear sometimes. I say, cut the requirements down until we get out of the housing crisis. Because there are more powerful ways for us to regulate environmental things that'll have a faster impact that won't exacerbate the crisis. The reason I'm not worried about this one, first off, is I agree that first clause, I think, is about dealing with some of these kinds of, redlining and kind of gentrification aspects of housing policy, where we can start to signal some of that. I kind of would like to see some of that language in here, that's the intent behind that first clause around less vulnerable places, is it's not to prioritize less vulnerable places and who's there already, but it's to encourage development of low-income housing in places where the residents will have better health outcomes because they're not in those areas. And the thing with this second clause that's talking about the technology is that I think these are, you'd be hard pressed, I think, to build a project that didn't already have some of these in regulation, in code, in whatever jurisdiction we're in. So many of these things already are included in the projects I've worked on, just to meet code for whatever you're doing. So I'd be shocked if all applicants couldn't find something in the technology aspect that made them competitive. To that end, can that second clause have some flexibility where folks can add this makes it seem definite that it's got to include heat pumps, energy efficiency, renewable energy, tree coverage, open space, or climate adaptability features. Is that the flexible clause that lets them say what their climate adaptation is, so that if it's not these sometimes questionable technologies, they can propose their own item for consideration, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So this hits what I think, this lets projects be more competitive when they're doing something that's not reliant on technologies that were not proven yet, while still prioritizing the neighborhoods. But I'd love to see the language in the first clause about some of the intent behind it, because I don't think it comes through all the way here.
Thank you. So I want to share that when I read this, because Auburn has been working with King County and really proud of the work. It was called CHAMPS, and it was a multi-month project where there were about 15 to 20 Auburn residents that came together to work on heat dome issues, because the temperatures in Auburn could be 20 degrees higher than in other parts of the county, and really appreciate the work that was done. They just had their final session a couple of weeks ago. But when I read that first sentence, projects located in neighborhoods which are less vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, I almost feel like that means Auburn is not a priority, because we are vulnerable right now to climate change. And with CHAMPS identifying that we really are part of one of those heat domes. So I feel I understand the desire here, but it almost feels like it's leaving out some parts of the county, some parts of South King County, because of our heat issues, our climate change issues right now. Dana?
I would agree with that. It's so very similar. It's got to do with our geography. Both Kent and Auburn are in a similar place, right? We're in it. We've got a valley between two hills, and a lot of the valley is covered in concrete, supporting the rest of the state's economy. So I do think it eliminates chunks of where housing also makes sense, because it makes sense near jobs, and a lot of our jobs are located in the valley. I think there are things you can do to mitigate it, but I worry about that very first sentence just sort of making those projects not competitive. And James, to your point, a lot of the things listed here are part of the new energy requirements, right? The state has passed some of the most stringent energy requirements in the entire country. And so those things have to be incorporated into projects anyway. So I guess I would be okay with this as sort of a, would you please consider, but I don't know that I would call it a priority. Maybe a tipping factor, like all other things being equal, this would set a project over the edge, but I worry about it being something that projects are ranked on sort of straight across the board with other priorities.
Thank you. Brian?
I'd be a little bit more comfortable if the areas that we're trying to identify were actually defined. Because when we say the neighborhoods which are less vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, Sonari just sent a link to some maps, which they change, and so it may have an unintended consequence where, to Mayor Ralph's point, if you have two equal projects and this becomes the tipping point for us deciding which one to fund, and one is right next to a light rail station, but it has a horrible score for climate change vulnerability, and the other one is out in the middle of nowhere with no bus stop, then we've got 10 ADT per unit coming into town, which is a worse result, I think, for what we're trying to accomplish than if we were to cite a project where it might be more appropriate. So I'd be more comfortable if we could actually define where it is that we want to prioritize. Anyway, that's my thought.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, please go ahead, Eric.
I'm sorry. I have a thought, and Claire, I'd be happy to help if it would be helpful, since I do write policy language on climate and environment things. But if we're talking about the beneficiaries and or being beneficiary centric, which is those who need affordable housing, what we're really talking about is environmental benefit, broadly environmental benefit. And I think there's probably a way to rework this around the intended beneficiary and prioritizing projects that have features that holistically contribute to, an overall improved environment for them. And that could include, the presence of trees or the proximity to parks, things like that. But I feel if the beneficiary is centered, then there's probably language we could still come up with that appreciates and recognizes projects that have positive attributes for environmental benefits that could, potentially impact the health and well-being of people living on those sites relative to other candidate locations. But it might just be some tweaking or some reworking or making sure that the focus is in the right place. And maybe another draft could meet with broader enthusiasm.
That would be great. Thank you. That's my concern is truly just in that first portion of the sentence, because I think it removes or it is open to a great deal of interpretation. And I don't know that we want that much interpretation on that type of a policy or priority.
Yeah, Mayor Baucus as well, the coastal members of SKIP who are getting increased climate variability out in the Puget Sound and increased wind traveling up the hillsides as a result of that climate variability. That's a negative impact of climate change. But does the fact that there's increased damage to structures as a result of higher winds then make the coastal cities of SKIP less viable candidates for affordable housing? So it's more as well than the heat islands that we have in the county. It's also additional places where other types of variable weather are impacting cities in negative ways, and the number of power outages that we have compared to several years ago, for example, it's increasing. But yeah, these are some of the things I think they'd just be ironed out if it was calibrated a little bit differently and really made beneficiary centric instead of problem centric.
Thank you, Eric. Everyone okay with that of working on the language a little bit? Victoria? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna ask, are we up against a timeline for this year? Is this for this year or for next year?
This is for this year. We'll be adopting the guidelines and the priorities at the next board meeting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Then yes.
Wonderful. Okay,
Yes, I'm on board.
great.
Yeah, and thank you for that suggestion, Eric.
Yeah, no, happy, and I appreciate the heart and the very positive motive that has gone into developing this, and I'm happy to see if there can just be some focus revisions to help make it a really strong piece.
I love the collaboration of this group. I really do.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone. That's very helpful. I'll work on some new language and shop it around a little bit before it comes back to you. And we got a few more things to touch on. So we'll go through those. So you'll notice here also on the slide, a geographic equity was changed to geographic distribution, as I think it more accurately reflects the intention behind the priority. So that's my recommendation as well, which really means we want SKIP funded projects in all of our jurisdictions. That's like in essence what we're talking about, just housing throughout South King County. So moving on. So historically, we have only received applications for permanent affordable housing, although we are asked maybe once a year if we fund transitional housing. I'll get this question at a council once in a while. So our guidelines don't actually clarify that. And the RCW authorizing substitute House Bill 1406 funds does not clarify the types of affordable housing which is allowed, and it simply just says affordable housing. The RCW authorizing House Bill 1590 funds clarifies that affordable housing can include transitional and emergency housing, but in practice we haven't had the conversation with the board about this. So this is my suggestion that we clarify in the guidelines that SKIP funds are for permanent affordable housing in order for future applicants and for SKIP staff to have clarity on this topic as we're beginning to solicit applications for the funding round. And then based on conversations with the advisory board in 2023, the desire was to use the limited resources that we have towards addressing the permanent affordable housing shortage. So would love your feedback on this.
Dana.
Just for clarification, we're talking about permanent affordable, all the definitions, right? Permanent affordable housing is different than permanent supportive housing. Or are we calling them the same thing?
I think for these purposes, I would say permanent affordable housing would not preclude permanent supportive housing because it's permanent.
But it's not the only thing in the category, right? It also includes housing without services.
Yes. Yes. So, and the way that we currently do these things now too with the applications is when the folks apply, they're telling us their, you know, what kind of services are included. Are they we haven't actually gotten a formal permanent supportive housing project. They're oft because there's so many deep requirements, and so they usually will call it housing with supports and things like that. So right now we have been, you know, funding permanent housing with supports and permanent housing without supports.
I guess I would like to see this language clarified, and I'm going to be super vulnerable here. And
oh my God. Oh my God.
Okay, there we go. I got.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I accidentally muted you.
That's okay.
I meant to mute myself. I apologize.
That's okay. So I don't know where I started. I'm going to be really vulnerable here, and so please nobody throw anything at me through the screen. I would like to see some clarification, and this is just because of Kent's current experience, but our PSH project is not going well. And I am a little bit worried about adding that into the mix of projects. And then when we start talking about the conversations around, we've got an application in jurisdiction and the jurisdiction's ability to say no, and where, you know, all those conversations we've been having over the last few years, it's complicated. And right now, if someone came to us with another PSH project, I would have really significant concerns based on my current experience. So I just don't know if that muddies the waters for the work that we're trying to do and makes it harder for jurisdictions to stay in alignment and everybody support projects in everybody's jurisdictions. Yes, I want to open that up for conversation because it's been really rough for the project that we have.
Thanks for that vulnerability, Dana. James?
Yeah, sorry, my son was getting ice out of the machine and I wanted to make sure it didn't overflow. And thanks, Dana, for that. It's, yeah, someone who does PSH. I've got 5 PSH buildings that I oversee through my day job. We know how intense it can be. One of the, and this is, I think it's great that we have the discussion here. This is I think our city councils, you know, don't always get a chance to talk about this until it's under a lot of scrutiny or there's a project on the table and it affects whether or not a project opens. One of the things that we know is that the things that we see in permanent supportive housing in our buildings would be happening whether they were in our building or not, but this gives us a place where there's, some level of concentration so that we can have services. And so the question is for us is always like, when we see a PSH project struggling, is it well resourced enough, right, to meet the demands? It is a concentration of unmet need, and that can be a really challenging environment. So it's valid, and there are solutions, but the solutions are all, I think, all come with dollar signs. But I think what I originally raised my hand for, and Dana, I hope that didn't come off as jumping down at you, right?
No, not at all. I mean, and I
Okay.
agree with everything you said. So as we're in the middle of this, and we've, with 1,000 calls for service to the location last year,
Yeah.
I don't have the resources to do that again. Like,
Mhm.
I don't have the resources to provide the service now. So when I think
Yeah.
the second one, I can't handle 2,500 calls for service in 2 properties. So and the commitment of the organization was this, we promised this isn't going to happen. And 4 years in, everything we were concerned about is absolutely happening. And it's now a conversation about, well, we don't have the resources to do something different. And so I don't know how we build that in when we're funding the construction versus funding the provision of service. So it's just, I am supportive of PSH. It's not an anti that, it's just I'm struggling at this point with, if the group comes and says, hey, we've got funding, we've got an application for a project and it's in the city of Kent, then it becomes a very public, like, it's down the road, and how do you say no because it's something we need, but the reality is I don't know how to pay for it. That's the struggle. So I don't disagree, James, with anything that you just said.
Yeah, and I think that's, I don't know if we want to make this a topic for another meeting, just because I think there's a lot to dig into and explore, where is it working? Where are we seeing challenges? How much of the concentration is happening in places that are well-resourced or under-resourced? If we're still talking about the language, and that's kind of like, I don't want to take away from the conversation that we've opened up, but I did have a question about the language on the slide, which is, I guess I'm trying to figure out, it sounds like this is really to clarify that we don't do transitional housing and shelter. Claire, is that the intent?
That's the intent.
Okay, which we've already allowed everything else, including, multifamily buildings and permanent supportive housing, all that is already allowed. This is just to make sure that when folks are applying, that they don't think of that, of like tiny house villages, congregate shelters, non-congregate shelters, or any of the transitional housing models that are out there, right?
It's to clarify the practice, or it's to clarify the practice that we already have been implementing, but we have not had that deep discussion or brought it to the board. So if we had, for example, a serious applicant for transitional or shelter in previous funding rounds, that would be an area where I would need to come back to the board and say, hey guys, we actually haven't had this conversation. And it's not clarified in the language. And so it really is the board's preference.
Okay. Thank you.
Sonari.
I was thinking of this as reduce the number of emails Claire gets, like line edit, potentially. But I also wanted to respond to Mayor Ralph's comments and just say, like, I think what you're experiencing is something that we are hearing as the funder of much of the operations and services side of permanent supportive housing. I think we are working through a lot of growing pains on what is changing, what is different when we move out of a concentration in Seattle and into more places, and what do we need to prepare folks for, and what more do we need within our service model. And to go back to our earlier conversation about reserves, we're also trying to figure out, oh my gosh, where do we get the money for that because of shifts at the federal level and everything else. But I guess what I would say is, I'm fine with the language on the page. I wouldn't want us to extend this further to actually limit the availability of funds for permanent supportive housing. But I very much think that the experience, we now have multiple sites and in skip cities, which was not true 5 years ago. And I think actually it's a great conversation to have at the board for us to exchange notes about, hey, how is it going? What are you hearing from your providers? Where are the pain points? And let's talk through them, especially since we have folks like James on the line to talk about it from a provider perspective, even if that's not the hat we're wearing right now, right? Eric got to wear his daytime hat earlier today. And I think for James to be able to do that as well, I think we are now educated and informed enough as a board and have some of the experience ourselves in a way that we didn't when we first started, that I would really welcome that conversation here, because I think it can also help inform a lot of the county's work moving forward as we talk about what we need, both from our housing system and PSH, but also a conversation that we are increasingly having that I just had yesterday with a whole host of the PSH providers, which is about where do we need to strengthen the connections between our PSH and our behavioral health system, and what can we do within the behavioral health system for that. And like what you just said, I want to validate, because it's very much what I just heard at that conversation yesterday. And I think this audience is another piece of the puzzle for the county as we move forward, since we also manage behavioral health for King County.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on this one? Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to organize a board briefing on permanent supportive housing and at a future meeting. Yeah, we can bring that back to you all and have further conversations about that. Does this, I guess I would like clarification from folks about this language. Is this okay? Or alternatively, we can just go back to how it was, if you would prefer.
Any thoughts on that? Any preferences?
I guess I would just like to see it defined further. I might be an outlier on this, and I get that. I just, it's a door, it's a opening that maybe it existed before. Now it's just coming on the page to me, but I just, and sorry, I absolutely would love to be a part of that kind of conversation, and it may shift where I'm at, but right now I just feel like this is a potential division point for cities, because what you may end up with a project where the city just can't support. And so far we've been pretty fortunate, because we've been pretty clear about sort of where we're all on board. So I don't know if there's a way to further define it or not, but I will defer to the group, just having registered my concern.
James?
I think clarification, I was going to offer that we should probably, can we be explicit in this and just say, SKIP funds do not fund shelter and transitional housing? Because that would get this like crystal clear from an applicant standpoint. We look for those words in direct, like it's nice when you have this is what you can fund, and by the way, this specific thing is not fundable. And I think that'll help us help our review panel not have to sift through stuff where folks are trying to make the case that their kind of shelter or their kind of transitional housing qualifies. And then it sounds like there's a separate conversation about the inclusion of the word permanent here, alludes to something that was already in existence in our eligible activities, but that does it draw more attention to it, and will it draw additional folks, or is it, because this is really clarifying what is already a policy. But it sounds like, at least for Dana, and I think for me too, when I first read it as someone who does this stuff, I felt like it leans a little more into PSH by including the word permanent in it, even though that was already a fundable activity, right?
I really like that first sentence that you had about the not piece. That to me is more clarifying than sort of this sentence here about permanent affordable housing.
So yeah, what I'm hearing you say, what I think I would recommend is, and let me know if I'm getting this right. For eligible activities, we will keep the old language with just affordable housing. But we do have an area that says SKIP does not fund. We do have a laundry list, and I can add, shelter and transitional housing to that list for the permanent supportive question. That would be, we can keep that as a question for now until further discussion. But we would have, just a reminder, in our process, you have adopted, and it's still included in the guidelines, when those if should we ever get a permanent supportive application, which we haven't received one ever, it would trigger our notification to the mayor, the city manager, the leadership of that jurisdiction, that this project is interested in applying. And then the city has the opportunity to let us know if that is something that they support or not. So there is that time period, and it's we've done that process. We've never received a letter yet, but I don't know if that would be helpful, Dana, in terms of, should that come, I know for your situation, that would be really important for City of Kent. There may be other cities that would be interested in hosting a PSH project, right? And so just curious does that encompass your interest? Does that check the boxes for this funding round?
Yeah, I think it definitely helps. And this is probably not true to this work, but there is such a huge political component to this that I am very much interested in keeping this group, as Nancy already pointed out, super collaborative and on finding ways to not sort of poke each other in the eye. And that this feels like one of those places, right? And if we can avoid that and still do really good work, that's really the interest that I have. So.
Okay. Anyone else? Any concerns or thoughts? I saw a couple of thumbs up flying across the screen. Okay.
Okay. Thank you all for that. Just one last thing. So as mentioned at the April board meeting, I've been collaborating with other public funders such as Arch, City of Seattle, King County, Commerce, Sound Transit, and the Washington State Housing Finance Commission to develop a set of financial assumptions that we'd collectively like applicants to use. These include credit pricing, interest rates, debt service coverage ratio, operating expenses, and more. So this will help applicants ensure a project's financial feasibility as the proposal is developed in the early stages. So one thing that other funders saw in the previous funding rounds were financial assumptions that weren't particularly realistic and made projects appear more financially feasible than perhaps they were. So I will be adding an addendum for our application once those final metrics are established, and we are getting closer. So we're hoping by the end of the month to have those. So I wanted to highlight this section here for you that's added as part of our evaluation criteria in the guidelines. And those are all the more substantive changes in the guidelines. There are smaller changes that you can see in that track changes version I sent you. So would be happy to answer questions about any of the things we talked through today or any of those smaller items as well that are included. And the ones I didn't go over, I felt were administrative in nature and that the board wouldn't have particular interest in. So the plan is to adopt the final version at the next meeting in June. And I'll come back with a revised version that shows, the conversation we had today. And we'll hope to adopt those next meeting.
Okay. Any comments, thoughts on any of this? Brian?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick comment. I'm not going to make a motion to add this or anything, but on the list of ineligible activities, it lists the construction or acquisition of behavioral health related facilities requiring land for these purposes. My council has expressed interest in this and inquiring if SKIP funds could be used for this. There are certain funds that we get that are restricted from using or from applying it towards those projects, but my council has expressed interest in us as a group exploring that possibility. But I brought this up before, and it doesn't get very far with this group, so I'm not going to make an issue of it. But just for the record, I wanted to restate that.
Any thoughts on that? Okay,
There's sharing my screen here to show where Brian is talking
Yeah,
about.
thank you, Claire. It's
Yeah,
right there.
And this is also the list where we will add that item we just discussed as well.
Can I just add something to that about adding the other item, and that is that if we do add that, I think the Federal Way has agreed with Kent on every issue that comes before SKIP. This one I'm going to deviate just a little bit, and that is that the PSH and other very low the very low income cohort is what we are in need of the most when it comes to the affordable housing units. And so if that segment becomes ineligible, in addition to the what I just brought up about the behavioral health facilities not being eligible, then really SKIP, and unless I'm mistaken, it's confined to a very the 50 to 80 range, which is it's at that, for us, that's the low end of the need. And so just want to make sure that we keep our options open to explore other ways in which this organization can help with both housing and homelessness issues.
And just to clarify, we fund up to 60% AMI for rental, and we only go up to 80% for home ownership. And that would only be from our smaller funding source. So our larger funding source from those 1590 funds is restricted at 60% AMI. So just to clarify.
Right. I'm speaking generally. It seems to be about 50 to 80. It seems to be where we're landing on a lot of our projects.
Okay, Victoria and then Dana.
Thank you. To Brian's point about the behavioral health facilities, I was not here at the inception of all of this. So I was wondering if anybody could maybe walk me through why that is something that's not included here, simply for historical purposes. Thank you.
Anyone want to? Claire, do you want to?
I can give it a shot. I wasn't here either, but I have some background in history. I know that so I'm going to start from the present, which is on this list. Our House Bill 1590 funds, which is our largest source of funds, allow for behavioral health facilities. And so we clarify that in here because they aren't, it's not housing focused, it's temporary, residential treatment for folks experiencing, crises in their lives. And so we wanted to clarify that SKIP is funding housing in that way, and I because it can be, you know, it could be assumed that we would fund those things if the funding source allows for that, right? So that's the clarifying point. And you know, our interlocal agreement really does focus on affordable housing, which isn't behavioral health treatment facilities, right? The language used is you know, strongly in support of SKIP's purpose being to advance housing really at all income levels, with particular focus on housing that meets the needs of folks on the lower income level. And that original ILA talks about housing being used to assist folks experiencing homelessness, right? That's the connection with homelessness and housing. And so would love for anyone who was here in the early days, if you'd like to expand on that at all or add context or color, I would appreciate that.
Thank you. Dana?
I think you're, Claire, I think you're right. That's where it was really about housing to begin with. And Brian, I 100% hear where you're at. We all have our targets, right? It's and Kent's is not any 0 to 30 and 80 to 100 plus is what we need. We have nothing at the top end, and we've got, you know, we do have some at that bottom end. I do think, and Claire, I need your clarification on this, but that Pandean project is down all the way down to 30, as is the other project by the light rail station. So we are getting some of that 30 to 50 in funded projects, and actually they're both in Kent. So doesn't help Federal Way, but we are funding projects at that 30% level. And
the Lehigh Skyway project, I want to say, is 75% 0 to 30% AMI as well. So quite a large number of units for that high need population.
Yes. Okay, other questions or comments? Brian, anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right. All right. Do we want to move on to the legislative forum? Okay, so back in March at our meeting, we talked about asking the SKIP staff to organize a legislative forum before the 2026 legislative session to raise awareness about SKIP's work. So we want to go over the outline that Claire has prepared. Claire?
Thank you, Chair. So just doing a time check, 2:24. We've got this agenda item. I've got a brief quarterly report for you, and then just a summary of the outcome of the legislative session from Dorsal. I think this is probably the most the meaty of the remaining 3 items. So happy to spend our time however the board would like, but so we'll jump right in. So as part of your agenda packet, you will find what I have on the screen here, an outline of what a legislative forum convened by SKIP might look like. This document is intended as a conversation starter in order to get feedback from you, the board, on whether this accurately captures your vision, and to discuss some key aspects such as when you might want to hold this, the location, who should be invited, and the run of show. So I'm sharing my screen here. I figure we can just walk through it, and would love to hear your feedback. So the purpose here is listed on the screen. So to convene elected officials or their representative with the SKIP boards, that's the advisory board and the executive board. to amplify the collaborative and unified work of South King County to address the shortage of affordable housing in the subregion. So amplifying, the good work that we're doing, pooling $14.5 million across the 11 cities that make up SKIP, to funding the construction and preservation of 679 units. So I think that's the basic purpose. In terms of the who. You, the SKIP Executive Board, would be the primary the primary attendee, I would say. The SKIP Advisory Board as well. We would invite the state senators and representatives representing all of the legislative districts that make up our SKIP member jurisdiction. So that's legislative districts 5, 11, 30, 31, 33, 34, 41, and 47. Potentially, we could invite county council members that represent the districts in South King County, although this was just an idea I had, but we could have separate, this could be a state-focused item as well, if you would prefer. We could invite federal delegates or their representatives. The governor's office on housing policy, I think, would be someone to consider inviting, and then the government relations staff from AWC, from the Association of Washington Cities. I would propose a 2-hour forum with opening remarks. We could have facilitated dialogue. I would definitely want to set aside some time for those more intimate conversations, the meet and greet style, where folks can talk openly with each other. Proposing a weekday in August. We would definitely do a poll for board members to start and see your availability, because we would want to make sure we have it at a time where the majority of the board could attend. Would love to have it in a venue in South King County. The Postmark Center for the Arts in Auburn is a lovely facility, and Mayor Backus already let me know that she would be happy to have it there if we wanted. If there's other ideas, would also love to hear those. And that is the overall gist of what I've got so far. So would love to hear feedback. Does this accurately capture your vision for a SKIP 2025 Legislative Forum? I'm very open to feedback. And yeah, this is just the beginning planning stages. So that's what I got.
Thoughts from anyone? Let's start with who. Well, let's go with the purpose. Does anyone have any concerns with the purpose that we have outlined? Okay. How about the who? Do we have too many, not enough? Are we missing someone?
It's a lot of people in a room.
Yeah.
Like, it's a lot of people.
Yeah, it's 24 if all the state senators and representatives came.
I mean, I have some doubts about the when, just August, and when, whether or not we'll actually get that many folks there. And so on the one hand, that makes it seem like, oh, well, don't worry, there won't be that many. On the other hand, it's like, well, but would those be critical partners that we need there? Just because I school and all those kinds of things happening. Immediately my first thought was like, oh, well, so many of these housing organizations, I was thinking about our 2 H's. There's no KCRHA here. They're a different entity altogether, right? And then I was like, you know what, this is already too many. We shouldn't be adding additional ones. So there is a feeling for me like this might be a little much.
Okay. And we can always do other forums later. If having federal delegates here is too much at this point in time and we want to focus solely on state legislation, then we can do that, and we can do another forum, another type of event with our county council members. We can have one with the governor's office and with commerce at another time. AWC, I think it would be good for them to be in the room if we're talking with our state representatives and senators, my personal opinion. But maybe it should just be skip executive and advisory boards, state senators and reps, and AWC for this one. Is that, I'm seeing a couple of heads nod and thumbs up, seeing some thumbs flying across the screen. Okay, let's just make it the state level for this one.
Super. And is governor's office okay? It's just one person.
Are we okay, James?
I guess I want to ask, is this, what is the participation threshold that we expect from everyone? Obviously, executive board, well, I imagine we would have things to say. Are we asking all these state reps to speak? Because that's a whole lot of different districts with different needs. You know, it could get wildly, you know, disparate. So if there's a thought of like a panel or a conversation, then there's participants who are there as, you know, contributing to that. And then there's people like the governor's office on housing policy person. They're an attendee, they're an observer. They need to be there. They need to be listening to us and our needs, but they don't necessarily need to contribute. Or I don't know this person or the policy all that well right now, but you know, I could see places like HDC, Housing Development Consortium, this governor's office. Like there are people who I want there to listen to us and learn from us. And because I don't think we get the kind of, I don't think we attract the kind of policy making attention that other parts of the state do around housing. So I want folks to come listen and learn, but I also don't want it to be, you know, that kind of like inner ring, outer ring kind of feeling. So that's what I'm grappling with right now, is what's the participation threshold for different attendees?
Good question. I don't know that I think that's part of the discussion that we need to have. Dana.
I have the same question as James, and I almost feel like the conversation is different in speaking to our legislators, even than it is speaking to the governor, speaking to how you know, our housing partners. They feel like almost different forums, because everybody has different levers they can pull, and so the focus feels like, I don't know how you have a sort of a cohesive focus. And also same question, like, is it for them to tell us what they've, like with our legislators, this is what we've got on tap for next year, this is what we're thinking, or is it for us to tell them, hey, you know, Nancy, to our conversation last night, could you just give us a break because we can't keep up? So I further defining that purpose, I think defines who the invitation is, you know, how broad it is.
I was seeing this more as an opportunity for you all to highlight, and myself to highlight, the good work that you're doing with Skip, because that work is really unknown to a lot of folks. Unfortunately, as much as we try and amplify and talk about our work, and when I do meet with senators and representatives and I tell them that we have pooled $14.5 million among the cities, they're shocked and impressed and excited, and I think that it's really important to continue that messaging. And so that, I guess, thinking from a strategy perspective, I think it's important for you all to have the floor and for them to listen. And if you think it would be beneficial to you to have them kind of talk to you about what they're thinking and get feedback, like certainly we can incorporate that into the, you know, the purpose and the what. But that was just my initial thought, was having this as you all say what you're doing, and then we go and talk with them, and however you'd like to do that.
Okay, Christina.
Thank you. So if I remember correctly, the original intent was, in fact, exactly that, to spread the word about SKIP and all the good, the details of what SKIP is doing. And if we had a good amount of representatives in the room, and in the 2 hours, in my opinion, I think that the most effective way for us to conquer this would be that first hour, having that, and I don't know that it would be a panel. We could get creative about the way we display SKIP, but if that first hour was like a sit down informational for everyone to learn, and then using that second hour for the mingling and to really get down in depth about what was, just advertised in the previous hour. And I'm sure there will be questions like I think, Claire, you just said that when you tell others about us, they're all shocked. And so if we use that second hour for those intimate conversations, perhaps it would be most effective that way.
Thank you. Thoughts about that? It's a Friday afternoon and we're all we're ready for the weekend. We can see it in front of us and we don't want to be looking in the rearview mirror. I get that. James?
Well, that brought Dennis on camera, so he's no. I also I know we had one of our, I think it was Eric, was talking about on the other H for us, right, around homelessness and how there were policies at the state level that were reviewed this year that there was, could this group come together and have alignment and conversation. And so I don't know if that's, since I don't see homelessness represented here, that
Right.
H in our name, I think, keeping the focus on housing is totally fine with me, because I think it's a lot to try to cram two of them into one area. And I don't think I think we've acknowledged that we haven't gone as deep into that other H as we probably need to as a collective before we start presenting. And we really don't invest in it other than the housing side of it with significant dollars. So that's just like a little bit of the background that I'm remembering, thinking, and Christina was able to bring back some memory for me, jog my memory a little bit on how this generated. So do we have specific housing policies like 1110 that we want to talk through and share how that's rolling out in our cities, right? So that we have something that we can get a response from?
I would think any of the legislation, first of all, we need to thank them for the 1490 and 1506. We can't just poke at them, right? We need to find the wins. We need to talk about how we as cities are implementing all of the issues, all of the legislation, and where the challenges are for us, right? If cities like SKIP cities are struggling to get all of these things activated, implemented, then think about cities that aren't us, that may not have the desire to do all of these things in the right manner. I think we do need to share with them in a non-confrontational way just exactly what the struggles are. You've got large cities like Kent, smaller cities like Normandy Park. The challenges of implementing these are going to be different in both cities. They're going to be very time consuming and very costly, but the challenges may be different. And I think it would serve us well. And I think, quite frankly, it would serve our electeds at the state level well to hear what those challenges are.
And just for awareness and planning, I am hoping to set aside some time on the agenda at our next meeting to talk through legislative priorities, to just start the conversation. It's a little earlier, but given potentially the timeline of August, which is, you know, what I'm suggesting here. Wanted to just budget in time for that as well.
Okay.
And I heard one comment about August. Would love other thoughts about when might be a good time, if a weekday in August may not be the best time.
Dana?
Can you hear?
Oh, sorry. Yes, Tom.
I would favor not doing it in August.
Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you, Dana.
I agree with that. I think doing it in September or October as our legislators are preparing for their work headed into January makes sense, but August is going to be really tough to get people together with trying to squeeze in last minute vacations and kids heading back to school and all of those kind of things.
Okay. So like mid to late September sound like a better plan?
That overload staff with the funding round?
So let's think about this. So
Great question. Thank you, Samari.
our applications are due September 3rd this year. And so we will be, you know, in the thick of reviewing those, summarizing it for our advisory board. So, you know, I think if we divide and conquer, Dorsal and I can probably do you know, a mid-September thing. There'll be a small pinch, but it'll be temporary and short. So I think especially if, you know, August is just not gonna be feasible. So I think we could do that.
And I think some of us can step in and help a little bit too. Oh, Victoria. Okay, Victoria's out from September 2nd through the 14th. I hope it's a fun trip, Victoria.
And we'll send, I'll have a poll to figure out you know, the best time. Probably, I recognize there may not be a time and a day that works for everyone, but we'll figure out what the best fit is. And yeah, and there may be an opportunity to have it during our September public meeting for this meeting for the executive board, because that's already on your calendars. I need to just double check and make sure we don't have any crucial business that needs to get done, that we'd be either moving up or postponing. So, okay.
Just, I agree, by the way, September sounds better than August, but just a quick call out if anyone wanted to read Judge Ryan's ruling in the Burien case that was dismissed yesterday. I think it's a really interesting framing for the additional homelessness H and the importance of policy conversations between this group of legislators. Is I think you're seeing increasingly courts say it's not their business and it needs to be solved on the legislation and policy side. But that was mostly the direction Judge Ryan's ruling went, and I think it's interesting for cities to reflect on with their legislative representatives.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, so we've got some good ideas to work on here. Victoria's going to Italy. Good for you. Let's move on. We still have a few items. And that, let's see here, we're about 5 minutes off right now. Yeah, 5 minutes off right now. So let's move to the 2025 Q1 report. Claire?
Thank you. And I think we'll be okay on timing. Yeah, we're good. So this progress report in front of you was included in your agenda packet. It's also attached to the calendar invite for this meeting, should you want to view it on your own device. So the 2019 interlocal agreement requires the executive manager to submit quarterly budget performance and progress reports on the status of the work program to you, the executive board, and that it be shared with the legislative body of each of your jurisdictions. As is our agreed upon practice, this will be sent to the staff work group members to distribute to your legislative bodies in the way that works best for each jurisdiction. So Q1 was an exciting time for SKIP. It's always an exciting time, but this quarter was particularly exciting. SKIP's first contracts and loan documents were executed for the rehabilitation of multi-service centers Victorian Place 2 in Des Moines and for the Habitat for Humanity Burien Miller Creek Home Ownership Project. And subsequently, we released our first funds from the Housing Capital Fund. And this is only the beginning of getting these crucial funds out the door. Other highlights include draft contract and loan documents being developed for Mercy Housing Northwest Burien Family Housing Project with an expected closing date later this month. Other notable call outs include the successful data update to the SKIP Affordable Housing Inventory Dashboard, and partnering with SHAPE to convene a region-wide presentation on developing affordable housing using universal design principles. Both of these initiatives were facilitated and executed by our very own SKIP program coordinator, Dorsal Plants, who did a great job on both of those items. Under Goal 3, SKIP was reappointed to the Growth Management Policy Board's Regional Transit-Oriented Development Committee, which advises the board on equitable transit-oriented development and the region's adopted growth strategy, and I do serve as the representative on that committee. I won't go over all the accomplishments in Q1, but would encourage you to take a look at this report at your convenience to better understand the day-to-day work of myself and Dorsal, and to recognize that this work is the result of your collaborative efforts and leadership within your jurisdictions, and being a strong voice and representative of SKIP. So thank you for all of your contributions to this work. So looking at the budget, here we are. Beginning with operating revenue. So these figures should look familiar since these are the annual member contributions. That's right here. And we have received members' operating contributions, everyone's, so thank you to our staff work group for ensuring that. The interest earnings in Q1 totaled approximately $88,000, so that is something to be excited about. And the Housing Capital Fund contributions are coming in now, so those will show up in Q2, in the Q2 budget update. So you may be thinking that this report looks a little different than previous reports, and you would be correct. The total contributions column, this last one on the far right, is new, and it combines both the operating and the capital fund contributions by jurisdiction. So those totals will, be populated. Next quarter, you'll be seeing a little bit more of that fleshed out. So total revenues, including interest earnings, are $490,510, and removing interest earnings brings the total to $402,539. Operating expenditures totaled $102,000 in the quarter, with an estimated ending fund balance on March 31st at $784,000. And now that we have expenses on the capital projects, I wanted to incorporate that into your budget update. So there is now a new budget column for the Housing Capital Fund with the capital projects line item. You can see that right here, right there. There we go. And so each quarter you'll see the expenditures across all projects in the aggregate listed where those numbers are. And then to get a more detailed look at those expenditures by project, you'll now see a new table at the bottom listing those expenditures by project. So you can see that here in this table. So you can see we've only had one project claim expenses in Q1. That was Victorian Place 2 at $282,000 there. So with the Housing Capital Fund expenditures, it brings our capital fund balance as of March 31st to $10.9 million. And by Q2's report, you'll see more action in the Housing Capital Fund as those contributions come in from the member jurisdictions, and that we continue to release our funds for the Victorian Place 2 and Beery and Miller Creek projects. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Claire. Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for adding that column too. All right, next is the 2025 legislative session update. And Dorsal is going to give us the final update of the bills that he monitored for us all throughout the session, which was no small task.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, everyone. I promise to try and keep it brief but effective. Hopefully my slides are showing. For the record, my name is Dorsal Plants. I'm the SKIP program coordinator. And yes, this was a very busy session with a lot going on, including the fact that we did have a new governor and a very uncertain budget. Despite those challenges, the session did technically end on time, although there are rumors in the media we'll talk about briefly here in a second. But it was a busy year, and some of the advocates have called this the year of housing 2.0. So just here really quickly for one final time, this was the 2025 SKIP legislative priority. And just as a friendly reminder, SKIP did not take any positions on the legislative bills this year. Session did end on Sunday, April 27th, and according to the Department of Commerce, a total of 18 bills related to land use or the Growth Management Act made it to the governor's desk by the end of session. You'll see shortly that while not every bill has been signed, most of the briefings I've attended anticipate at least the bills related to land use and the Growth Management Act will be signed before the deadline. Speaking of adopted bills that have yet to be signed, at least as of 9 a.m. this morning, the capital budget bill had been passed, but it has not been signed by the governor. This has led to some speculation in the media. The governor has until Tuesday or May 20th to sign the capital budget, and has said to some sources that he intends to take the full time to review it. I did attend a briefing through Department of Commerce this week, and they are anticipating, I'll say that very lightly, that the budget will get signed before the deadline. If the current budget is signed, there is $605 million set aside for the Housing Trust Fund, which is an increase of 15%. And there's also $100 million set aside for CHIP, which is an increase of over 60%. Of that $100 million, $30 million is allocated to support projects in cities and counties with a population of no more than 150,000 people. And here you can just see a breakdown of some of the specific funding in the Housing Trust Fund, at least as it's currently written. That includes $250 million for multifamily affordable housing, $72.5 million for affordable home ownership, and $50 million for affordable home preservation. And so here you can see the bills that were passed that we have been covering the last few months in our monthly update that have either been signed or still awaiting the governor's signature. Just wanting to highlight a couple of the ones that are listed here. So House Bill 1491, or the Transit-Oriented Development Bill, did pass, and Puget Sound cities will be required to implement the bill by 2029. The bill went through a few changes through session, but it requires cities under the Growth Management Act to allow new residential and mixed-use development in station areas, and it established a 20-year MFTE program for those developments. Additionally, cities will be required to reduce impact fees by 50% if a project is within a station area and is utilizing the new 20-year MFTE. Senate Bill 5148 is a bill that created an option for local jurisdictions to have housing plans voluntarily approved by the Department of Commerce, which affords the jurisdiction some protection if the plan is appealed. Instead of the appeal being directed against the city, it would be directed towards Department of Commerce since it is a Commerce approved plan. It would be entirely voluntary, but the bill also did make changes to how jurisdictions are held accountable for their plans. Commerce will begin selecting 10 jurisdictions every year to fully review for compliance with their plans for compliance with state law. Jurisdictions found to be out of compliance will be issued a correction letter, and if the jurisdiction does not make the corrections, it will be at risk of losing access to some commerce grants. And also Senate Bill 5184 is the parking requirements bill, which says that no more than a half space is required per multifamily home, but it also prohibits parking requirements for affordable housing along with several other types of housing. It's important to note for especially some of our SKIP cities that cities with a population of under 30,000 are exempt, as well as developments in a 1 mile radius around the SeaTac airport. So I know that applies to at least one of our SKIP cities. Here's just a couple of more of the bills we were monitoring that passed. Here I just quickly call out Senate Bill 5687, which was a bill developed to fund the foreclosure prevention network after the federally funded homeowner assistance program will end next month. It has a foreclosure prevention fee of $80 that will be assessed for each residential mortgage loan that's originated, except for reverse mortgage loans to seniors to help support funding the network. And the next several slides, I'll just slip through rather quickly since we're running short on time, but you can just see all of the bills that did not move forward that we have monitored over the last couple of months. As just a friendly reminder, any of the bills listed here in the PowerPoint deck, they're hyperlinked, so you would be able to get a one click if there's any here that you might be interested in. But that's the update as I have it. I'd be happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, Dorsal. Any questions from anyone? That was a lot of work, I know, covering all of that during session. So thank you very much. Eric, you have a comment or a question?
I'm just curious how many got their commerce warning letter like we got. I'm guessing everyone.
Which letter is that?
Related to Dorsal, which one was that? The relating to implementation of housing elements and Growth Management Act requirements.
That is,
I can't remember the bill number by name. I was just wondering if others have gotten that same letter, which we're aware of, a number of cities have, including us.
The housing accountability, it's 51 Senate Bill 5148. But I believe that the letter that your jurisdiction received might be based off of the comp plan review process that's currently going on.
Okay,
instead
separate
of
issues. Thank you, Dorsal.
Thank you, Dorsal. Right, any other questions or comments? Thank you again very much, Dorsal. I hope you get a break now for a little bit. I know we have you busy on other things, but really appreciate your work on that. And moving on to item number 11, updates and announcements. Claire, I think you have a few to provide to the board, and we are almost right on time.
Yes, and we are quickly losing quorum.
Yeah.
Just a reminder, we have a June 13th in-person executive board meeting at 1 p.m. in Auburn City Council chambers. You'll be adopting the Housing Capital Fund guidelines then, reviewing ideas for SKIP's 5-year vision and voting on your top ideas to explore further. We'll also be discussing SKIP's role in homelessness and how the board would like us to engage in that work. And if there is time, we'll also begin discussing SKIP's legislative priorities. I wanted to inquire with the board, and I know we're kind of out of time, but as I'm developing the agenda for that meeting, if absolutely necessary, would you all be willing to add an extra 30 minutes to that agenda? I know it's not ideal, but so the meeting would run then from 1 p.m. to 3:30. Maybe a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
Think let's see,
I see a thumb. I see one thumb.
June 13th. I may be pushing it. I have, Tammy has put a hold on my calendar for interviews.
Okay. We will, as I develop that, if it comes to it, I'll give, try and give lots of advance notice to everyone.
Great.
And then for awareness, we have moved to action minutes. So those minutes should look a little bit different, but should align with the way that the majority of our member councils do minutes. And for awareness, I'll be meeting with the governor's office to discuss the Washington State Housing Strategy that they're putting together for 2026 and 2027. Along with our partner sister organizations, Arch and SHAPE in Pierce County. I'm finalizing contracts with Burien Miller Creek and Burien Family Housing. And then we have a lot of upcoming city council presentations scheduled for the adoption of the 2026 work plan and budget in the coming weeks. So don't be surprised if you see me at your council. And that's all I have, Chair. Thank you.
Excellent. Anything else from any members for the good of the order? Tom, anything? I saw you come off mute. No. Okay, well, thank you all very much. Thanks for your incredible amount of engagement today on so many different topics. I really appreciate it. And thanks to Claire and Dorsal for all of their work, and the staff working group as well. Let's never forget them and the amazing things they do so that we can have the discussions that we have. I wish for you sunshine this weekend. I don't know if we're going to come through on that, but I wish for you sunshine wherever you are and whatever you're doing. And we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.